The inside story on the issues that affect you and your community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
It was hard for the kids, especially my 4-year-old.
Hard for Shanae Foster, her boyfriend, and their 3 children living out of a car.
For about 2 weeks.
Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. I'm Dan Hurley. We take a break this morning from the candidates and ballot issues to focus on 2 questions that are not directly on the ballot, but are always part of the public debate. What to do about and for those who are homeless, and the proper use and misuse of tax dollars. Beginning in 1996, the city of Cincinnati and Hamilton County began a collaboration to manage homeless services. In 2007, that effort incorporated as the Cincinnati-Hamilton County Continuum of Care for the Homeless, leading to the adoption of the Homeless to Homes Plan in 2009 by City Council and the County Commission. In 2012, the organization took the more direct name, Strategies to End Homelessness. The goal is that between 2012 and 2017, to reduce homelessness by 50% and eventually end homelessness. I am joined this morning by Kevin Finn, the Executive Director of Strategies to End Homelessness. Kevin, welcome back to Newsmakers.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for changing the name. Continuum of Care was blah, blah, blah.
That was the federal government name for something we did, so it made sense at the time.
It made sense at the time. It was just impossible. There was no acronym for the darn thing.
No.
So anyway, you've just issued your first sort of annual report based on this 5-year goal, and we're going to take a look at this. So first off, who's counted as homeless? Because in that report, I found your definition interesting in a couple of ways.
Well, the federal government, which funds most homeless services, has its own definition, which is people who are on the street, in a shelter, or in transitional housing. But I think a lot of people wouldn't consider a person in a housing program to still be homeless. So while that's the federal government definition, we very frequently talk about homelessness in terms of literal homelessness, the number of people that at some point were on the street or sleeping in one of our shelters.
But you specifically exclude people who have lost their homes but are staying with relatives or friends and are sort of couch surfing.
Right. Well, one big part of the report that we just issued, a progress report on ending homelessness, is talking about prevention. And the people, according to the federal government, again, a person who has lost their own housing and is now staying with someone else is at risk of being homeless. They are not currently homeless. So all of the numbers that are in our report in terms of people served in prevention, those are people who are basically doubled up and living with someone else, whereas the number of people who are homeless and counted that way in the report are people who have literally been on the street or in a shelter.
Because I think when I've had people on here from this public schools who talk about children in the school system who are homeless, they count. They start talking about people who are living because they've lost their own house, but they're double.
I mean, they're definitely, it's sort of where people are on the progression that hopefully will not lead them toward homeless. You have people who are literally on the street. You have people who are in shelter. You have people who have lost their own housing and are doubled up. And then sort of one step above that, you have people who are in danger of losing their own housing but haven't quite gotten there yet. Depending on who you are, you might consider all those people to be homeless. Given that we oversee the federal funding, we, in certain cases, have to go by how the feds define it.
And given your definition, which is a little stricter, how many individuals, distinct individuals, not people who were homeless, then found a home, and then were, not in and out, but how many people in Cincinnati do you consider homeless?
Well, in 2012, we had 7,013 people who were literally on the street and encountered by an outreach worker on the street, or were a resident of a homeless shelter. That is an unduplicated number. So some of those people were counted in both places, but 7,013 people in 2012.
Over the past few years, as we've gone through this recession, how has the demographics of that homeless group changed, or has it? But I have the impression it has.
Well, there's a wild card sort of in answering that question. The federal stimulus package included money for homelessness prevention, and it was the first time ever that money had been available for prevention. So in 2009, this huge new resource for prevention came online, and that was 3 years of funding, so it was available to us until the middle of 2012. Essentially, we did not see a decrease, or did not see an increase in literal homelessness in the last year, but that was because we served almost 3,000 people in prevention services during that year. So the demographics, if you look at who is homeless, hasn't really changed that much. But what has changed is the huge number of people that we were able to prevent from ever showing up at the front door of a shelter. Now, that having been 3 years of funding that ended in 2012, that money is now gone. We have a much more modest amount of money available for prevention now. So hopefully, if the economy continues to get better, we still don't end up seeing an increase in homelessness. But with that resource gone, if the economy doesn't continue to improve and the job market doesn't continue to improve, we could end up seeing a big increase in homelessness.
One of the things in your report that really struck me is the number of children, and this is sort of where you started in this area as a street worker working with homeless children. I was really struck by the numbers of children under 20, under 18, under 12, and then this figure of children who are they're homeless and unaccompanied by an adult.
Absolutely. I mean,
they're out of their homes.
There are a lot of myths of homelessness, that they are all single adults and that sort of thing. That is not at all the case. 30% of our homeless people in Hamilton County last year were children, and 1 out of every 10 homeless people is a homeless teenager or under the age of 18, unaccompanied by an adult. So on the street, all by themselves, 1 out of every 10 homeless people. And 3 out of every 10 homeless people are children. The others are in tow with a parent sleeping in a shelter, that sort of thing. But you're right. I mean, I started out 15 years ago as a street outreach worker working with homeless teenagers, and that was that population. And unfortunately, that population is still there and makes up 1 out of every 10 homeless people. That's not who the average person pictures when they think about who is homeless.
Yeah, but when you see it in this report, or you see it in any of the other things that you've published,
right,
it's something to really come to grips with. Another part of this was, on the demographic side, the high percentage of people who are homeless who have some sort of disability and/or mental illness.
Yes. I mean, 62% of our homeless population last year had some sort of disabling condition. There's a whole range of conditions that could be, but 62%, and a full third, more than a third, 36% have 2 disabling conditions. So really, homelessness has become more and more clear as we have better and better data about the issue, that it is very much a healthcare issue, because if people had appropriate access to healthcare services to address those disabling conditions, they wouldn't be homeless.
Do you think the Affordable Care Act will make a difference?
I hope so. I hope so. There's every reason to believe that it will. How much of an impact will depend on things such as Medicaid expansion and all that, you know, many things that are wild cards right now system-wide. One
of the things in your report is that you really stress that, well, prevention first is there's a multi-directional approach. There's not just a silver bullet here to addressing this issue. But one of the things that you really push in this report is rapid rehousing is the benchmark approach, and that 9 of the agencies that you work with adopted it in this past year. What's rapid rehousing?
Homelessness tends to be a fairly short-term crisis. So in our prevention program, on average, we assist households for 3 to 6 months. And we have a 95% success rate just doing 36 months. The average length of stay in shelter last year was about a month. Rapid rehousing is a housing option that we make available to homeless people, where generally we assist them for a relatively short period of time, 6 months. Whether we catch them before they get to homelessness or whether we house them after they were homeless, it still tends to be a fairly short-term crisis. What we were finding is that, and why rapid rehousing is sort of in vogue right now, is because what we were finding is a lot of programs were actually serving people who had been homeless for longer than was really necessary in order for them to achieve stability again. So if you're serving someone for 12 months who really only needed 6 months, well, then you could have served 2 people in that period of time with the same amount of money. So rapid rehousing is really focusing on giving people as much assistance as they need to not be homeless anymore, but not really going way beyond that.
And that assistance is more than just an apartment or a roof over their heads. It's also a variety of support services too,
yes,
right?
Yes, and in some ways rapid rehousing, the goal of rapid rehousing is to get people out of shelter and back into housing more quickly, but pretty much to provide them in that housing the same type of services they might have been receiving in a shelter. So we get them reestablished in an apartment. They still have a case manager who is providing them with intensive services to make sure they have what they need to find a job, and put whatever services need to be in place for them long term to get an income so that they will be stable when the rapid rehousing program stops working with them 6 months later.
The woman that we heard just a little clip from at the beginning of the show here came out of a package that Channel 12 did back in July. And one of the things that came out of that was she was homeless, living in a car for a couple of weeks. She was actually working multiple jobs, but none of them added up to enough. And one of the services she got was the assistance at finding a job that actually paid enough to support.
Well, I mean, it's part of why prevention is so effective, you know. So for under $800 per person, we can prevent somebody from becoming homeless, because the reality is once a person becomes homeless, such as the lady you were describing, it is that much harder to get them reestablished in housing. Even if you just think about the basics of once you have lost all your housing, chances are you definitely have to pay a new deposit. You definitely have to come up with first month's rent. You probably have an old utility bill from an old apartment that will have to be paid off before you can get utilities turned back on in your name. All those things would have to all be paid at once to get you reestablished in housing after you've already become homeless. None of those things are quite as expensive if we can head them off at the pass before a person becomes homeless.
And we only have about a little over a minute left right now, but you have declared this goal to cut homelessness in half in a 5-year period. Is it possible, and does this annual report show that you're making the sort of progress you need?
I think it shows that we're making progress because now we have comprehensive prevention services. That was sort of the third leg of the stool that we didn't have even just 4 years ago. But we really have to take a 3-pronged approach to this. Homelessness tends to be an issue that people have tunnel vision about. It's either all about shelter, or it's all about providing housing, or it's all about prevention. We have to do all those things. We have to prevent as many people from being homeless as we can. We need to provide a high level of services, including health care services, to people who do end up on the street and in shelters. And then we need to have housing options for people to move on to, whether it be rapid rehousing, which we were discussing, or permanent supportive housing for severely disabled people. We have to have housing options for people to go into.
Okay. I want to make sure that people know how to find this full report and more about Strategies to End Homelessness and something else. If you're interested in the way this issue of homelessness and the question also of the city policy to people with disabilities is playing out in the Cincinnati mayoral and council campaigns, the Center for Independent Living Options and the Homeless Coalition are hosting a candidate forum this Thursday night. The forum will be held at the First Unitarian Church on Linton Street, just off Reading Road in Avondale, from 6 to 8. If you want to read the annual report and find out more about the Strategies to End Homelessness, go to their website, strategies2endhomelessness.org, all run together. So, thank you very much, Kevin, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
How would you like a brand new driveway, practically for free? How about a new porch or walkway? Sounds pretty great, right? But what if that new stuff was subsidized by your neighbors, the taxpayers? That's what's happening in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. And that's not all. The state of Indiana says the Lawrenceburg program is hundreds of thousands of dollars in the hole. And get this, it violates state law. Local 12 News reporter Jeff Hursh and videographer Kevin Kuykendall have been investigating the concrete gravy train.
Road construction or resurfacing. Annoying with all those detours, but necessary. Once the contractor is finished, he moves on to another road construction project. Except in Lawrenceburg, Indiana.
Well, there's been driveways done, there's been retaining walls, there's been garage floors, patios, and probably other things that I don't even know.
Welcome to Lawrenceburg, a city which probably has more new driveways per capita than any community in America. That's because Lawrenceburg has what's called the Off-Right-of-Way Concrete Program. That program lets contractors who are doing street work for the city of Lawrenceburg also do work at private homes and businesses. But according to the state of Indiana's financial watchdog agency, there are lots of problems.
Problem number one, the city pays the contractor for the work at somebody's house or business, and the citizen is then supposed to reimburse the city for a small percentage of the cost. But plenty are not even doing that. According to the Indiana Board of Accounts, the state agency which checks the books, in 2008, the city was owed more than $200,000. By 2009, nearly $350,000. 2010, more than $500,000. And 2011, the most recent year audited, more than $600,000 total. Mike Lawrence is a Lawrenceburg councilman opposed to the program.
The problem is, in the past, there's been many citizens, they didn't do the contract correctly, they didn't get both parties to sign it, so they can't file liens. There's really nothing they can do to go after the money unless the people will just pay it.
Which brings us to problem number two. While the city is owed hundreds of thousands of dollars, according to the state auditors, it's a pretty good deal for the contractor doing the work. Here's why.
The Board of Accounts says the rates that the contractor quotes to the homeowners for driveways, sidewalks, porches, patios, and walls does not correlate to the rate billed to the city for concrete work performed on private property. In other words, the contractor may be, say, quoting the homeowner $1,000 for a driveway and billing the city $2,000. That's how the program works, because the city subsidizes the at-home construction. Although the city's records are so confusing, auditors say it's impossible to tell how much the subsidy is. City engineer Mike Clark tells me a ballpark average is the homeowner pays 25% of the total cost, the city picks up the rest. Although it can vary based on the type of job, say a driveway versus a patio.
And now, problem number three, which, when you think of it, really should be problem number one. According to the state bookkeepers, the Off-Right-of-Way Concrete Program is against Indiana law. Never should have happened.
By reading the State Board of Accounts reports for many years, it's illegal to spend public funds on private property for improvements.
So why in the world has Lawrenceburg continued a program which the state auditing agency says is illegal? A program which that agency said Lawrenceburg should discontinue as far back as 2010.
The program started small, and then, in the words of one city official, it was like letting a lion out of a cage and trying to corral him back in. Back around the year 2000, Lawrenceburg, under a different mayor, the late Paul Tremaine, flush with cash from the Riverboat Casino, began offering free 10-by-20 concrete pads to residents living downtown.
The idea was to get cars off the main business streets and into nearby alleys. Over the years, that free 10-by-20 spread citywide. It's still part of the program. Mike Lawrence said no thanks when it was offered to him earlier this year.
And I told him I wasn't interested in getting anything, to just keep on going past my property. And the lady told me, no, you don't understand. You get a free 10-by-20, absolutely no charge at all. You at least get that. And I said, no, ma'am, you don't understand. Just keep on going.
And over the years, the Off-Right-of-Way Concrete Program kept growing. Not just a free 10-by-20, but as long as the contractor was in your neighborhood, the city would subsidize much more work on your property. A bigger driveway, a porch, a wall, you name it. And as concrete sprouted throughout the city, the amount of unpaid bills sprouted as well. Construction Inspector Mario Todd concedes billing in years gone by was inconsistent. Previous administrations, he says, told some people they did not have to pay anything. Most others made small monthly payments, Some paid everything, some didn't. This is Meyerfield Drive, where the concrete gravy train stopped this summer. 11 houses. 9 of them received free or reduced rate work, like Nancy Seymour.
We had a new driveway put in, a new sidewalk to the porch, new step.
Seymour is being charged $2,500, but figures it would cost more than twice that amount without the city subsidy.
But my husband and my son said it was a bargain.
Seymour is not aware of the troubles surrounding the concrete program. It's not like the city advertises it. But proof is just a few streets away.
Now, this house behind me is a classic example of how Lawrenceburg's off right-of-way concrete program got off track.
According to court papers, the city agreed to do work at Robert Mullen's house in 2009. A new driveway, new sidewalk, new steps, and a new patio. Mullen's bill more than $28,000 to be paid over 4 years. But the documents say Mullen paid only $950 total and nothing since September 2012. New Mayor Dennis Carr wrote to Mullen, "Start paying or we'll sue." Mullen's handwritten response, "The agreement I made with the city was $100. I was under the impression some people didn't pay anything on their account. The city settled with Mullen out of court. He will resume paying."
Remember, Mullen's original bill from the city was about $28,000. Homeowners only pay a percentage of the cost. So what would it have cost Mullen for all this work if he had paid for it out of his own pocket? He told me the contractor said $120,000 to $150,000. And the contractor did not just eat that amount. The city of Lawrenceburg picked up the tab.
The company which did the work during the state audit years we inspected is Dave O'Mara Contractors from North Vernon, Indiana. Still working in Lawrenceburg. We called that company twice for reaction, no response. Meantime, at last, the city is starting to go after residents who have big unpaid bills.
It was very shocking, to me, that these violations were out there.
Leslie Votaw is Lawrenceburg's new city attorney who says she met with auditors for the first time last year. Votaw says the city apparently wanted to drop the program years ago, but kept it going to head off a class action suit by residents who had not gotten their freebies.
They're saying, all these other people have received this benefit and now you're going to stop it. I mean, they felt slighted in some way.
And so it's been going ever since. The city telling auditors Lawrenceburg did not want to discontinue the practice until the concrete program had been offered to all property owners. A program the city attorney says has resulted in remarkable improvements to the city as a whole. Finally, however, City Attorney Votaw says Lawrenceburg will wrap up the program this year, 5 years after the state said it's illegal. The mayor has sent out collection notices, and for the first time, Lawrenceburg is also suing about 30 residents for back payment and expects to collect about $50,000 from those. Without conceding it broke the law, Lawrenceburg is conceding that maybe the state auditors had a point.
I do think that it's this mayor's priority to try to clean the things up that the State Board of Accounts is suggesting.
Some people who owe the city will no doubt pay, but Lawrenceburg will never collect all of what's owed, not even close. Confusing paperwork, incomplete contracts, and the statute of limitations on collections all get in the way. With all those issues, it's impossible to determine how much Lawrenceburg has actually spent on free and subsidized concrete over the years. But if you figure the 75-25 split, it could be several $1 million in a town of just 5,000 people.
And this probably sums up the off right-of-way concrete program as well as anything else. You remember the bridge to nowhere? Well, this is the driveway to nowhere. You say you don't have a house on your property, but you want a city-subsidized driveway anyway? You got it.
Councilman Mike Lawrence, who turned down the free or low-cost concrete work for his own house, says he does not blame those who took it. He blames those who gave it.
I would like for the city, the administration of the city, to obey the laws of the state and just try to do things the right way.
In other words, set a concrete example. Jeff Hursh, Local 12 News.
The Lawrenceburg City Attorney says because much of the money for the concrete program comes from riverboat gambling funds, it's not technically Lawrenceburg City money. But the Director of City Audits for the state watchdog agency says that's wrong. City money is city money, period. Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. For the next 5 weeks, we will focus on countywide issues and a race for Cincinnati City Council and Mayor. Next week, council candidates Vanessa White and Sean Butler, and Issue 1, the operating levy for the public library. Join me. Have a good week. Join me on Sunday for Newsmakers. Have a good week.